everyone. Welcome to Media Literacy Training. Thank you for being the first people to do this with me. This is the first event I've hosted, and I'm really excited to get into it. So, to start, this is a quick agenda of what we're going to do today. Just running through introduction, some statistics, bias, misinformation, how to read, how to watch, a note on photos and cartoons, media literacy bingo, get excited for that, and then a little bit on setting news boundaries, and then hopefully a little bit of time for Q&A. And now would be a great time to silence your phone if you have not done that yet. Okay, we're going to start with introductions. Say hey to your neighbors, meet a new friend. I think most of you already know each other, but might as well. Just, share it around the room. Hi. Cool, great, lovely, awesome. Community, right? You might be wondering who I am. I am Ashlyn. I am a career journalist that decided to do things a little bit differently and go out on my own. So I have been in the news industry for about 10 years, but took a little bit of a hiatus in digital media in general because I saw where the landscape of the industry was going and knew that that information was necessary. I recently, about a year ago, actually launched my own business called Ask Ashlyn that I will get to in a minute. But basically, I want to revolutionize the way that people consume news and the way that we interact with it. I want people to not be stressed out. I think we don't have to be, even though that's what the media landscape has taught us for such a long time. So with trainings like this, I really want to put an emphasis on media literacy and making sure that people are cognizant of what they're consuming and paying attention to so that we can all be healthier around our news consumption, right? Also, cat mom and Dolly Parton enthusiast, and I call myself a political realist to say, call a spade, The news and the way that we work through news is changing, and the landscape of our country is changing. And a lot of the discourse in the journalism industry is a little bit reserved around that still. But I think it's important when people speak about politics and about news to be able to speak freely and to be able to speak authentically. So that's what I want to try to cultivate here today. What is Ask Ashlyn? My brainchild. It's a text message-based Q&A platform. So effectively, it's a living conversation hosted through text message, where you, through your subscription, buy in to receive updates from me twice a week and the ability to ask me questions all the time, anytime. Anything about news, anything that is interesting to you, anything that you encounter in the wild that you want clarification on. The point is to have discourse around news, not just journalists telling you what you think they need, journalists telling you what they think you need to know, but rather you in control of your news experience. Essentially, Ask Ashlyn is the buffer between hard news and easy delivery. It's my tagline. So in the spirit of getting to know each other, how do we feel about current events right now?
Great.
Okay. Terrible? Okay. Adjectives? Throw them out?
Bad.
Great.
Very bad.
Okay, yeah. Seems to be general consensus among most people that you talk to, right? Where do you get your news? Okay, more specifically? Snapchat.
I know it's bad.
Really?
You're being serious? I watch Snapchat all the time. I recognize it's mostly crap. Well, 98%.
We can't be talking shit on different platforms here. We're all coming in at different places. Yeah. Okay. Where online?
Midas Touch.
Okay.
Stack.
Okay. So like newsletters. Okay. Cool. Any other shouts from the back of the room? Podcasts. Great. Okay. What podcasts in particular?
Marketplace, NPR.
Okay. No laughter, just we're free sharing. We're, getting to know how people are consuming, because that's an important part of understanding media literacy, is knowing that everywhere that news is all around us all the time, right? And wherever you are, there's different clues to look out for and different kind of hints for what direction a certain podcast or a certain newsletter or certain article is pointing you to. And so having an awareness of like where people are coming from helps to determine what you should focus on in your own media literacy journey, right? And finally, what makes news feel trustworthy to you? Travis, I see you laughing. What's up back there?
Yeah, I mean, I get my news from all around, like Elm Zero. I order a lot from the stock market. So living some of the events sometimes that exist in the news and what actually comes out, I'm always skeptical sometimes of like, I know what actually happened, and obviously they skew it for, missing information, or they just fill in the gaps of information that isn't there. I just tend to trust more international news, vice U.S. news.
Okay, yeah.
Because they actually have, I would say, a little more like holistic approach, and it's all about the world, not just one side or the other of the party that we have here.
For sure. Absolutely. Titus, any thoughts?
No, I think it's a good answer. I don't think most news feels trustworthy, regardless of where the source is coming from.
Mhm.
Hopefully, them trying to have two sides to whatever conversation feels a little more trustworthy. But
Okay. So when you're going through news, like you're scrolling, you're reading articles, is there anything that pops out to you as like, hey, I trust this? Or is it just you know which sources you align with, and that's kind of how you filter?
it's more the latter.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Sometimes I think like with certain headlines you can clearly see like spin, like it's sometimes just like a little too clear. I don't know. So
For sure.
just trying to figure out whether like the first thing you read, like how objective it seems or not,
Yeah.
or how much it seems to be editorializing, I guess. But I don't know. That's what the reading. I actually think that's a really hard question to answer.
Fair enough. We're going to get into some of that talk on headlines in just a few minutes. But to start here, let's discuss what modern media literacy looks like, because what you may have learned as media literacy when you were a kid or when you were in school is completely different now, because so much of our news is online and on social media, and that landscape is straight up not regulated. So when we're talking about, how journalists put together a story or how information comes to you, it is very different now than what it used to be, in the sense that, yes, you needed to monitor for, credibility and trust and all those things, but now there's an additional layer of misinformation, bias, rage bait, trying to provoke you to gain engagement, propaganda, extremism, corporate influence everywhere. If you haven't noticed, all of your platforms are now completely ad-riddled to the point that they're impossible to use from my perspective. It's like, I don't want to be seeing, an advertisement at the movie theater, and that's what's happening now. That's where we are in the corporate culture in the media landscape as well. So there's just a lot more to look out for, because it is within the wall-to-wall news coverage that we've had for such a long time, and now our smartphones that are in our hands and in our faces 24/7, it is nearly inescapable. It's around us all the time. Some quick stats. 69% of Americans don't trust mass media. Seems like this room aligns with that. 54% of adults get news from social media regularly. Seems like, yeah, exactly. And 72% are concerned about what is real or fake online. That is in the United States. If you look globally, that statistic is actually 87%. But here in the States, A few more stats here. Adults under 30 are just as likely to trust social media as a national news outlet. And it is not just adults under 30, it's actually Republicans as well. 1 in 5 Americans regularly get news from news influencers, but if you look at that under 30 demographic, it's about 1 in 3. Nearly 2/3 of those influencers are men. So think about what that does to the landscape. And 3/4 of them have no current or former affiliation with the news industry. That's my favorite part, because that says a lot about the content that you are consuming online. So looking at all of this, right? Using social media for news has absolutely skyrocketed since 2020. In COVID was when we saw this shift start to happen. That means the news industry is changing very quickly to try to adapt to those changes in audience behavior. That also means that our social platforms are adapting to the fact that people want news, but still holding out for their business interests algorithmically. And this leads me to the most critical point of what's happening on social media, which is journalists adhere to a code of ethics, making sure that they're only reporting fact, only using credible sources, making sure that they're not taking bribes or reporting certain stories as a result of certain interests. Influencers don't do that. Influencers have no code of ethics to follow. And that is a glaring hole in the social media news industry that a lot of people are trying to figure out how to regulate. Because if you have traditional journalism that says, I will only report fact, never opinion, but you have an influencer who says, maybe some fact, but a lot of their own input. Is that not credible? Is it not journalism? Or is it just something that we have to look at with a critical lens? And that's a lot of what we're going to be exploring today. Not to mention, algorithms reward creators for pissing you off. The angrier they can get in engagement, the more they are seen as important to the platform, the more credibility they gain. So much of the news and political content that you see is intended to be highly biased and inflammatory so that it will drive engagement. It's also part of how so many people are getting hooked on social media news is because it's pushing on your emotional triggers and getting you to keep coming back. So let's talk about bias. We all know partisan bias. It's the one that we see the most. It's what we see every day, kind of anywhere you look. Corporate bias is when business or advertising interests influence how a story is produced or influence whether that story is produced at all. This also shows up as sponsored content that can often be very hard to see. I'll have an example of that a little bit later when, say Chevron has bought an ad and it's written to look like part of the content. Demographic bias. This often shows up as generalizations. So grouping large types of people together and generalizing their experience, right? We see this a lot happening with stories about immigration right now. Big story bias is what we see mostly on social because everything is so compacted, everything is so short. Big story bias is effectively taking the big picture at the expense of the details in the context. And when you have 90 seconds to produce a reel, that context probably might not make the cut. My favorite is neutrality bias, which is when someone tries so hard to remain neutral that they compromise the actual story. And I think we've seen this a lot since 2016. It's happening less now, I would say, but it's still part of the landscape, wherein journalists, in an effort to remain balanced, end up disproportionately skewing things for what the reality is, right? We've all seen that happen. How bias can show up. A lot of different ways. Framing, the way that a story is positioned. In that top line, they need to get your attention. In that first 3 seconds of the reel, they need to get your attention. What is the emphasis that they are putting on that story? If it's not balanced, obviously, if it fails to represent all sides of a story. Tone, what is the word choice that they're using to determine the direction that this story is meant to take you? How are you supposed to feel as a result of the words that they're using? Sourcing, who are their sources? Are they credible? Or are they leading into that narrative that the article is asking you to follow? And story selection, whether or not a story gets covered at all. And this, in the modern day, is something that I think is closely related to censorship, which we're not going to talk too much about today, but in general, what a news outlet decides to cover, decides to and to not cover, says a lot about their editorial priorities in their editorial coverage, right? When something is not covered, it can often scream about what those editorial priorities are. And it shows up on social media largely in these 3 ways, but also many more than that. Typically, you see a lot of opinion on social media. People positioning opinion as fact. This case, this example, this screenshot is from the New York Times opinion page, so it is actually labeled correctly if you were to encounter it on social, but it uses language, as you can see in that headline, that you see a lot in opinion piece journalism that is not necessarily labeled as opinion piece journalism. Rage bait, my new favorite thing to explore. Content that is designed to piss you off so that you engage with it and so that you get mad and keep coming back. And propaganda, content promoting political interests or a political party, whatever it might be. That image over there will be etched in history until the end of time. A quick note on word choice and tone. I find word choice to be the easiest entry point for media literacy. It is a quick way to scan for where this author or this journalist is trying to take you, right? So this can look like weaponized language, generalizations, grouping by political party. When you encounter a headline, when you encounter something like this over here from The Atlantic, Friday night massacre. What does the word massacre say to you? It says that something really fucking bad happened, right? That's not a neutral word. And yet here it is at The Atlantic, which has a leftward lean, but is one that tries to purport itself as more neutral. So it's important to pay attention to the language that is used, and I think as Alejandro mentioned earlier, that can be kind of the top layer, like scratching the surface of, as I'm understanding all of this and moving through it, tone is one of the easiest lenses to look at because it's fastest, as opposed to digging into the whole story. What is misinformation? This one is a little bit tricky. People get misinformation and disinformation confused. Misinformation is information that is misleading, but was not created on purpose. It is created without the intention of knowing that it is there to construe people in the wrong way. It is generally shared by people who don't know that it is wrong. And that's why it's such a problem, because you will encounter something on social, or encounter something on Facebook, on anywhere, and think, oh, wow, that's a really big deal. I need to share this. Come to find out, the facts were wrong. The image was manipulated. Versus disinformation, which is the subset of misinformation that is deliberately created to misinform you, deliberately created to steer you the wrong direction. That's a distinction, but it's an important one, because most of the people that share misinformation don't know they're doing it, versus the people that share disinformation usually do. How misinformation can show up. False context, missing context, taking a quote or a clip out of context and putting it into something else. Fabricated content, that's anything that's just completely made up, a fake article, a fake video, a fake photo, AI generated, whatever it might be. Imposter content, content that is created in the image of something real. So say a fake tweet with that real politician's icon logo attached to it, or a message from Wendy's or ExxonMobil or McDonald's with that logo attached that that brand does not actually speak for. Very easy to create these images, and they're everywhere. Stolen satire, my one true love. Satire is very easy to manipulate depending on the tone of that satire, right? Like we've all seen an Onion article, and you know how glaring that is in its satire, right? They make you laugh, they're cheery, they're fun. Satire exists at a lot of different levels. The Atlantic, from a couple slides ago, they have an entire section dedicated to satire that does not read like satire. So it can be very easy to misappropriate what satire is and where it shows up. And finally, manipulated content. This is anything that is doctored, tweaked. So for example, a couple weeks ago, an image went viral that was a man in detention with ICE, and he was wearing a shirt that said Trump 2024. Come to find out that image was doctored. The photo was correct. The man was detained by ICE. He was not wearing a Trump shirt. But people were able to produce that photo and share it on the internet and create havoc as a result. So how does misinformation show up on social media? A couple of red flags to look for. People saying, let that sink in. The media won't report this. Anything conspiracy-ish. Make this go viral. Do your own research. That's my favorite one because it's condescending. Also patterns. If you notice manipulated texts or signs on t-shirts, doctored amazing nature or space photos, anything that looks too pretty to be real probably is. I keep getting AI-generated birds on my feeds. Mom, I know you've sent me some of those. They're beautiful. Photos of protests and crowds, those are very easy to misappropriate, and screenshots of articles with no links. Hello. Oh, sorry, no problem. Okay, so how do we read? Journalists communicate what the story is and why it matters at the very top, because we'll let you in on a secret, we know you're not reading the whole thing. So we put all of the action right at the beginning, and then everything else is the gravy, right? So I pulled a local version of a national story for this. This is NBC San Diego. But if you were to approach this article in the wild, check the tone of the headline and the subheading first. What emotions is it trying to elicit from you? Check the date of the article, because often information will be really, really old, and you might not notice that if you don't pay attention to the date. Also, certain things don't have authors, which is important for spotting misinformation. It's critical to notice if there is a byline. Is this attributed to somebody, or is this just something that got pulled out of thin air with no author attached to it? Scan the first paragraph for tone and direction. Notice in this one, rereading it again, I was up until 4 a.m. That's just a brief nugget of what exactly happened, but what is the tone that it's setting? Are they positioning Elon Musk as a good guy or as a bad guy? Pay attention to that. Also, make sure it doesn't say opinion anywhere near the top. A lot of news outlets will hide the fact that it's an opinion piece in tiny lettering or in a different section of the website, and you won't notice that it's opinion, and you'll read it as if it's fact. Going further down into this article, who is impacted by this? That's often where a lot of the generalizations will come in. Who is this article focusing on? Who is receiving the impact versus who is doing the action? How did this outlet or author come into this information? Was it direct or secondhand? In this case, you can see the email was directly sent to NBC News, so that was a one-to-one source. They received it. Versus, oh, I heard it from so-and-so that they received this, which can happen and will be hidden in the text of an article. Do quotes or claims that they might make have source links? And do those links lead to the right place? If there's a quote that is not attributed, do you trust that quote? How do you know where it came from? How do you know if it's real? It's important to check the source links and make sure not only that they're there, but that they lead to the same information, because human error exists and people misrepresent things all the time. That could have been a much longer quote that made a much different point. In this article, just took a snippet of it to make their point. All of those questions, plus all of these. When you are reading an article, it's important to poke holes in it. Whose perspective is being shared here? Is one perspective dominating the article? Do they share a lot of them? Are there ads? What do those ads point me to? Are they hidden? Who are they quoting? Do I deem those people trustworthy? Do they make any claims that aren't backed up by data or expert? Am I seeing something that contradicts what I've heard about this before? Is it new information to me? Is it new information that they're presenting? Are they repurposing something old? Does it feel like they're taking someone's side? That's an important one. And how am I feeling as I read this? What reaction is it stirring in me? Quick note on ads. Companies try to hide their advertiser in sponsored content. So this is an example from an email that I received this morning in one of the newsletters that I subscribe to. That little blue line at the top that says a message from Walmart would be very easy to miss if you were skimming, right? And then you would read this article in the tone of it at the bottom, thinking, Walmart's doing some cool stuff, not noticing that it was an advertisement. And that is the point. Advertising and corporate dollars are bought in to everything in the journalism industry because journalists, as we know, are broke and need to make money and depend on advertising. So you might not be receiving this message with the understanding that it's an ad. And it's critical to pay attention to that because it's hidden everywhere. How to watch a reel. I know we all do it. I get them from my grandma all day long. It's important to recognize that every single thing you see on social media is an oversimplification. All of it, I promise, 100%. Because a story that could have taken 7 minutes to report on a traditional broadcast landscape is now 90 seconds. What do you think gets cut in those 90 seconds? A whole lot of context. So, as you're watching these reels, just like everything that you did when you were reading an article, all of those questions you were asking, all of those little inlets you were trying to find, if you're watching a video from an influencer, look for their body language, their facial expressions. What do the graphics say? How are they showing you their biases within the video? And if it's a news outlet video, what's the video source? Who are they quoting? What's the clip of that quote? Where is that supposed to lead me to? Does it suggest a broader context or seem very isolated to the point they're trying to make? And what do they have to back it up? Because within the social media landscape of all these little snippets of videos, it all seems like isolated incidents. It's, the algorithms point you to, okay, I'm seeing this part of the story here, and then 4 days later, I'll see this other part of the story that kind of contradicts that part of the story, but I didn't follow up because I just saw it on social. I was just scrolling, and whatever, I'm doom scrolling. I'm not really thinking about it. I'm not really being that critical of what I'm consuming. And yet, then you end up with fragmented information and incomplete stories that could end up making you repeat information that maybe is not true. And no one wants that, right? Reading social posts for context. Social posts usually have text. Often it's captions, sometimes it's text on screen. This information tends to be incomplete, pushing you to watch the reel or look at the carousel or do whatever the platform needs for them to feel like they've gotten engagement and to push their advertiser dollars up. Don't ever take anything you see on social to be full coverage. That should go without saying. What type of language are they using in this headline? Notice at the top, grouping, conservatives, generalization. What did they put in quote? Exceptions. What is that supposed to mean? What is that supposed to make you feel? And what is this pushing me toward? A specific conclusion, specific belief? This one seems pretty glaring to me, that this is a very pro-abortion post. But sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes it's this loud. This one I came across last night, and it made me laugh because I have never seen that Doge logo before. Another way, it's crazy, right? Another way to monitor the social posts that you see quickly is the account verified. Verification doesn't mean tons anymore because they've monetized it, but it is still something to check in on, right? Look for a crazy number or a big claim. 749% is insane, right? That's not like a statistic that you can just shrug off as like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, what? So notice that. And then ask yourself, where did they get that information? Does the caption mention a source and who is it? As you can see down there, obviously this is Fox News. We know Fox has a lean, but a conservative fiscal watchdog group discovered an alarming trend at the agency. So a group that we know based on their politics is hell-bent on making sure that education gets defunded because that's the landscape right now. They're saying this. So do I trust it? Do I not? How does it align with my beliefs? And it's important to remember with news on social media, as with everything on social media, it's the highlight reel. It's what they want you to see. It is the imagery they want to put forward, not necessarily the whole story. As we know, that's why you get vacation photos and not depression photos. It's the same vibe. This is one of my favorite examples of a news outlet that claims to be neutral and super isn't. Courier Newsroom. They call themselves Democracy's Newsroom, but if you were to look at any of their content, super, super left lean. Glaringly so. What are they highlighting? Quote, threat to air safety, 190 million. What imagery are they using? On the other side, literally, loudly saying it's a deadly grift. That is not neutral language. So news outlets have an interest in swaying you to pay attention to their content. And they will do that based on their biases, based on their lean, based on their aims, right? But in our landscape, calling something Democracy's Newsroom, you would think should be general. You would think that that means we're here to support the United States on the whole. Clearly not. So something to pay attention to. The language that people use to describe themselves does not necessarily reflect how they're showing up. Photos. Images can be a very powerful way to trigger your emotions. I remember where I was when this happened, as I think many of us probably do. Taylor, I think you were there. That image, I think for many of us, changed the election, right? When that picture came out, we all kind of recognized, whoa, that's a really powerful image. And the narrative that it created with that image, with the action taken within the image, with the fact that that image was across every news site for a full week, despite how crazy our news cycle is, and I think Biden dropped out a couple days later. Images are powerful, just like the one with Obama. That image on the other side, when that image came through during his presidency, that elicited an emotional reaction in you that's very different from the one on the left. It, reminds you of who that man is and what he stands for and all that he's doing. And as news outlets use photos, they all do, think about how the photos that they're using are framing the narrative they want you to believe, right? There are some horrible pictures of Obama out there, and there's some interesting pictures of Trump out there. Probably good ones. I don't know. There must be. Gotta laugh at that. But just notice how photos can register for you and how photos can drive you in a certain direction, because you see the photo before you read. My favorite, political cartoons. Always biased. So fun, such a treat. I love a political cartoon. They are always, 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 always biased. The one in the middle is my favorite. They are meant to draw a feeling or emotion. They are actually used to illustrate bias most of the time. That is the point of a political cartoon. So, such a treat, such a joy, just notice. Notice where they're asking you to go. We know people tend to end up in media silos based on their political preferences. The algorithms do this for us. We like to see content that we already agree with. That is how behavior works, right? It makes sense, it can be easy to understand, but it doesn't necessarily give you the full picture of what this landscape is. The other problem, there's a lot of push and pull at news outlets right now. There's a lot of push and pull with the just kind of general news industry. For example, the Associated Press got kicked out of the White House a couple weeks ago, and that was a whole thing. And now a whole bunch of other outlets are backing them up. So the Associated Press, historically neutral, historically grounded, right? Where are they going to end up in the mix of being pushed out of the White House and then having other people come to their defense? We are in a moment right now where everything is changing so quickly, you can't really trust that what you see is exactly what you think you're going to get, because everything is shifting very, very fast. And this is one of my favorite tools to highlight and kind of explore where people's biases are. If you encounter an article, you can just throw it into all sides and they'll have a meter. Well, they'll point you with an arrow. Hey, this leans over here. Hey, this leans over here. And they do a pretty good job of breaking it down. We know that politicians choose which outlets to speak to based on how they believe those outlets will make them look and wanting to be put into a favorable light. This is a list that are currently registered as net neutral, according to most audiences. To Travis's point earlier, BBC, The Guardian is another great one. A lot of people like The Guardian. That's a UK-based outlet that does a very good job of holistic coverage. And local news. Local news usually does it right. We should all be reading local news, but local often does not have the same depth of coverage for national matters. And so, mixed bag. But trust your local news, read local news, always. Okay, note here on journalistic neutrality, because it's something that a lot of people in the industry like to discuss. It is something that a lot of news viewers like to discuss. This is my thinking on it. It's important to remain neutral. It is absolutely important to be unbiased. It is absolutely important to tell a complete story. However, when things change, when things change to the point that it is unevenly weighted, to report on it as evenly weighted would not be good journalism, right? If a circle becomes a square and the news starts to call it, or continues to call it, a circle, is that news telling you the whole story? I don't think so. What do you think? So journalistic neutrality is something that is always evolving. It is something that we need to pay a lot of attention to, especially in this creator landscape, because a lot of people are saying it like it is, and that is both a good thing and a bad thing. I'm not here to tell you that social media news is bad. I'm just here to outline for you the ways it is different from what we've seen before and the landmines to look out for as we navigate it. Let's play bingo. You ready? Again, social media news is a dramatic oversimplification. So even the outlets that you see, even real articles that you might encounter on Google News, Apple News, whatever, they were flawed to begin with. And now we've taken that information that had holes in it, and those articles that had biases and that had direction or lean or were pushing you in a certain direction, and we've made it much, 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 much more granular. And when you do that, what is left is the opinion and the lack of context and the missing information. And that's the landscape that we're in. And that is where we know mostly young people are getting their news, but young people matter. And young people's awareness of information really matters. So it's important to acknowledge that distinction, absolutely, that yes, things have gotten worse, but just because it's worse doesn't necessarily give us an excuse to tap out of it. That's my belief. Like, as an American, we do still live in a democracy, and we have a right to free press. We have the right to influence our elections. We still have a say in this. And if we were to completely tap out and not pay attention at all because we don't like what's happening, it's overwhelming, it's bad information, we can't trust it, then we effectively give up any influence that we might have in our democracy. Because if you're not paying attention, you don't really know what's happening. So how can you move forward and drive the country in the direction that is the will of you, the will of the voter, if you're not at least paying some attention? If you're not at least making an effort, doing so within reasonable boundaries and reasonable limits that work for you. But I've talked to a lot of people, especially, in my age range and kind of everywhere, say, I hate it all, I want to go, no more news, I'm done, tapping out, deleting it all, I'm getting off social media, I'm never going to look at a news article again, it makes me too stressed, it makes me feel too bad. That's not really a solution, though. It's a solution, but when you go back to that content, it's all still there, and now you're left behind because things are moving so quickly, and chaos is coming at you from all angles. And you don't have to engage with all of it, you don't have to keep up with all of it. But it is important to get a sense of the general pace and the general direction so that you can monitor, hey, I technically am still in charge of this country. I'm a voter. Do I like where this is heading? Or do I not like where this is heading? And in order to form a real opinion on that, that is not just gut value based, which is what a lot of people do and end up voting on, you need to pay some attention. You need to have some sense of understanding. And I hope with trainings like these and with my platform and everything else that is happening in the world and people like me doing events like this and trying to steer news in this direction, that we can help people to not be in that state where it's like fight, flight, or freeze with news. It shouldn't have to be. It should just be something that we can tap into, pay attention when we want to, and then go on about our day. It shouldn't affect you. It shouldn't make you depressed. It shouldn't be all-encompassing. It shouldn't make you shut down. And that's something that the news industry on the whole, I think, has gotten very, very wrong because they didn't see where things were heading in time to stop them. And now here we are with the landscape that we have. Social media is a cesspool of all things bad and wrong and misleading. But it's what we got, so we better learn how to navigate it because it's not going away until we make it go away. Moving forward, we're done with bingo. Congrats to all who played. Let's talk about setting boundaries, because to the point that I was just making, pretty much everybody I know has expressed in some way or another that they are interested in not paying attention to news anymore. Fine, but not acceptable by my standards. There are ways to approach news that don't need to make you sick in the head, right? And some of the key themes that we see are people feeling overwhelmed. Thanks, Jim. Overwhelmed, unwell, mentally stuck, anxious. We need to learn these boundaries, and we need to learn to approach news with intention, just like you would approach any content with intention. It's very easy to get stuck in the doom scroll, but very similar to how it's very easy to get stuck in the binge. I just watched Yellow Jackets so fast, and Severance, gone. But we need to approach all of our media consumption with intention. And these are some of the ways that I've found that help. If you're feeling your news fix, if you're driving for a news fix, check yourself. How do I feel? Am I anxious and looking for more? Am I trying to dig myself into a hole right now? Did I just hear something that stressed me out and I want to dig deeper and really focus in on that feeling? Because that's what anxiety will do to you. Or am I feeling grounded and good? And I just want to receive some information and okay, I'm going to be able to process this, then I'm going to be able to put it down and go about my business. Check in, because with the doom scroll, with the numbness that these platforms ask you to find, it's very easy to just remain in that lane of I feel bad. I'm going to keep feeling bad. I'm going to find more that makes me feel bad so I can keep feeling bad. Breathing before and after. If you do subscribe to my subtext, you might have seen this. I think it's important. You know how we see those like get ready with me videos all over your feed? I think it's important to get ready to read the news. I think it can be helpful if you are noticing that you're in that mood where you're going in for your news fix, like, okay, maybe I should do a deep breath before. Maybe try box breathing. That's inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding for 4. It makes a box when you think about it. Just to get yourself into a zone of like calming your nervous system before and after you engage with this stuff, because it is inflammatory. My screen just popped up. It is inflammatory. Again, much of it is meant to piss you off. So if you can approach it with a level head, you're already way ahead of people who are encountering it and then freezing by it. And we want you to be in a state of action, not a state of freeze. We want you to be able to process and think through so that we can, on the grand scale, think about solutions and think about direction and think about voting and civics and not, oh, I feel really trapped in this. I need to go hide under my weighted blanket, right? We want you in that former state, not the latter. And this is one that I'm working on. It's a habit that needs to be built that is very, very hard. But catch yourself in your doom scroll. We all do it. You're in front of the couch. There may be chips nearby or something, right? It's when you have the phone and something else, there's probably also a bigger screen on as well, and you are just zoned into your screens. Catch yourself, because it's so easy to, like, every time you pick up your phone, you open Instagram. That's instinct. It's unfortunate, but that is instinct. And then you are just mindlessly going through this stuff. This happened to me a couple nights ago. I was moving through this, and it was like 11 o'clock, and I'm scrolling, which I shouldn't. My Do Not Disturb is on by then. But it was like some Trump something, and it was big and red and inflammatory. And before I even got through the social headline, I checked in, said, do I need to know this? Do I want to know this right now? Not even need. Do I want to engage with this right now? And the answer was no. And so I went to the next piece of content and then asked myself that same question. Do I want to engage with this right now? No. And then you kind of find yourself in a pattern of, okay, that's a cute picture of my friend on vacation. I'll throw that one a like. Or, ooh, that's a video of a cake getting decorated. I'm a sucker for those. I'll watch that one for like 15 seconds and then realize, no, I don't really need to engage with this either. My time is too valuable. And then you catch yourself in the scroll. Check with every single piece of content. Every new thing that comes up in your scroll, ask yourself, do I actually want to engage with this right now? Most often you'll find the answer is no. Then you put your phone down. And then 15 minutes later, you pick your phone up again and do it all again. It's building new habits. But there are ways to manage this so that it doesn't consume you, because it's very easy for it to consume you. I know I've felt that a lot, especially since November, and it's made me depressed, and it's been very hard to feel the influence of not just everything that's happening in politics, but just the way that it is at us all the time. And you don't need to be in it all the time. You only need to be in it every now and then to get a sense of the messaging. So with that in mind, I can help. The purpose of this platform is to help people tap out. The purpose of this platform is to help you only check in when it makes sense for you and help you to have questions and answers and dialogue and conversation instead of a flat, oh, I saw this influencer say this and it seemed like it was loaded with opinion, but it also seemed like it kind of made sense, and then leading you down that aisle. None of that. Simple questions, simple answers, simple updates to the things that actually matter, things that are actionable for you, so that you can touch base whenever you want to and not all the time. That's the point. Would love to have you all as subscribers. And something that I think is important to remember about this, the media ecosystem is constantly changing, forever changing, especially now, with the way that these platforms are modifying things based on who's in charge and the corporate interests and the political interests, with the way that news is responding to how all of those things are happening, with all of it. It's AI, God forbid. So much is changing. And there's more to learn. There's a lot more to learn. This was like scratching the surface of modern media literacy. So I plan on doing an event series. This is just the first of what I hope to be many. And the next one is going to be focused on AI and how to detect fake information that is completely fabricated, because AI is complicated. And I had a professor about a year ago who made a very interesting point to me that I will share with you. That is, you know how pretty much all news outlets are paywalled now? Like, you might get a free article, but then when you click into the next one, they're gonna be like, subscribe. AI news, it's not paywalled. So real journalism that was done by a journalist that followed that code of ethics, that was produced with intention, you have to pay for. So you're not gonna find when you do a cursory search. You're not gonna have access to it. All the junk that AI spits out, free for the taking. Go ahead, read it, lap it up. And we are only heading in that, we're barreling toward that direction. So, a lot to learn in terms of AI with fake images, fake articles. It'll be fun. Hope to see you there. And if you want more information on events, just find me after and I'll add you to the email list so you can get more of these in your inbox. Thanks, y'all. And we are earlier than I planned, which is cool. So now we have some time for questions, if anybody has any. I know we've been chit-chatting a little bit throughout, but any questions about anything?
How would you address an article that is clearly misinformation but has already spiraled and being regurgitated by large groups of people?
What do you mean address?
Well, I don't know if you feel, but I kind of feel a responsibility to my friends, family, the people that follow me on social media, to point out when something is so clearly incorrect. So
For sure.
that they're also able to spot that for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's
So, like, how would you have that conversation with somebody?
yeah.
Well, it depends on the person, for sure. It depends on where that person is coming from. If they are like, you know, we all have family members or friends that are a little bit stronger headed, that it may not be as easy to kind of penetrate into that. But the thing that I will always default to is fact. And though facts are political now, and facts are polarized now, I think a lot of people still have at the very basis a foundational understanding of, okay, blue is blue, and red is red, and the grass is green, except in the spots where it's brown. And if you can illustrate to people that have experienced misinformation, I'm curious, is there like something specific that you were noticing, or just a pattern of like people sharing?
I'm a public health student right now.
Okay.
So we see a lot of that.
Oh, health misinformation for sure. That is everywhere. And that started with COVID. It's not ending. Now we have bird flu. Yeah, I would say, you know, oh yeah, all the birds. Hopefully they're not sick. They're cuties. I would say you just got to use logic. Because again, with misinformation particularly, people often don't know that it's fake when they've shared it. And if that person is truly interested in knowing something, feeling a state of, like, feeling confident in what they know, then you directing them to say, hey, actually, like, that was debunked. It really is this way, and this is why, might be doing them a favor, because people, when they get caught sharing information, feel foolish. Like, if you get caught with something wrong, you've shared it to other people, like, that's a feeling of embarrassment. That's worse than pronouncing a word wrong for a really long time and then having somebody correct you like years later. Like, it's that same feeling of like, oh shit, what have I done? So I think using logic, using sound information to just gently, like, hey, I actually saw that was debunked. This was the real thing. And like, it's crazy how this stuff spreads. Like, don't ever make it their fault. Don't ever make it a problem that they have bought into. Just like, oh yeah, this source that like is credible for this reason said that this is actually the real thing. But like, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that you knew. Like, frame it as a favor to them would be how I would say to do that. Hope that helps. So much of the conversation about media literacy is like everything is so biased. Everything is biased. Everybody has bias. Bias is implicit in all of us. So it's implicit in all journalists. It's implicit in all creators. It's everywhere. And we know that certain outlets are very biased. And like that Doge example, like that was very clearly super biased. But to the people, like conservative fiscal group, that big, like that was a very biased snippet of text. That was a very biased point they were making. As was the abortion one. And there's so much of that everywhere that we can't just trust the silos that we see. We can't trust the silos that we're in. We cannot trust the content that you're used to because it's all biased. And it gets rewarded for being biased. So, constantly evolving conversation.